Welcome to The Explainer. Look, if you've ever tried diving into centuries of economic theory, you know it can feel completely overwhelming. From the mercantilists to the Keynesians, we're constantly bombarded with these contradictory ideas that seem almost impossible to untangle today. But what if there was a systematic, totally straightforward way to break them all down? Well, let's jump right into this and look at a brilliant framework designed directly from our source material to do exactly that. You see, to really judge economic theories from back in the 1700s, 1800s, or even the 1930s, we absolutely cannot just look at them through a modern lens. We have to understand the gritty realities of things like the Industrial Revolution. Think about it. This was an era where even children were pushed into dangerous factories working grueling hours just to survive. That kind of environment fundamentally shifted how people thought about commerce, labor, and society. Having this kind of context right at the outset is a game changer for understanding the ideas of leading economists.
So to cut through all that noise, we're going to use a specific 5-question method that gives us instant perspective on any school of thought. The 5 major questions are 1. Historical background, 2. Major tenets, 3. Who benefits, 4. Era validity, and 5. Lasting contributions. Consider this your ultimate decoder ring.
Okay, let's jump straight into question number 1. Historical background, or really, the root of the ideas.
Economists actually debate quite a bit about where these theories come from in the first place, and they generally fall into 2 distinct camps. First up is the relativist approach. Relativist economists assign primary importance to the surrounding social, political, and economic environment. They believe the environment shapes the questions economists ask and therefore shapes the theory itself. So to a relativist, what's considered true in one specific time or place might be totally useless in another. On the flip side, we have the absolutist approach. They completely disagree that outside environmental factors are the main drivers. Instead, they argue that theory evolves through internal factors, things like discovering and explaining unresolved paradoxes. Basically, it's all about correcting the errors of the past.
Let's look at an example to make this concrete. Take the mercantilist school. Why on earth would they promote aggressive nationalism, glorify merchants, and justify massive military expansion? Well, according to the relativist approach, during that specific time in history, only a heavily armed, powerful nation could capture colonies, control trade routes, and actually compete internationally. The harsh reality of imperialism is what literally shaped their economic truth.
Now let's flip it and look at the absolutist approach using the classical economists. In this view, it's like a giant chain of correcting homework. Each generation just corrects the errors of the guys who came before them. For example, Adam Smith of the classical school took the ideas of the mercantilists and the physiocrats, corrected their errors, and synthesized them into something better. Then later, Alfred Marshall of the neoclassical school comes along and corrects some of Smith's mistakes. Marshall integrated the concept of marginal utility to better explain how consumer demand drives price. This fundamentally improved our whole understanding of microeconomics. See, the theory just evolved internally.
Right, that brings us to question 2, major tenets. This is where we look at the core beliefs of a school.
Now, boiling a whole school of thought down to just its major tenets has a really distinct strength. It gives us an incredibly concise presentation of their ideas. It shows us exactly where a group of economists agreed. But, and it's a huge but, there's a built-in weakness here. There are literally always exceptions to these broad generalizations. So we have to be super careful with generalizations. Here's a great example. A major, defining tenet of the classical school was their strong belief in free trade among nations. Pretty straightforward, right? But if you zoom in, Thomas Malthus, who was a very prominent classical economist, actually favored tariffs on imported goods. He wanted to protect domestic agriculture and wealthy landlords from cheaper foreign grain. Just goes to show there is always an exception to the rule. Moving on to question 3. Who benefits? Or, as I like to call it, following the money and the power. To really grasp an economic theory, you have to ask exactly who profited from it. We want to identify the specific groups that supported a school and the groups the school actively appealed to. The mercantilist doctrine, for instance, very obviously benefited merchant capitalists, kings, and government officials. Meanwhile, you have the physiocrats. They were an 18th century group of French economists who believed wealth came strictly from agriculture. And their theories? Well, they heavily favored capitalist farms that employed wage labor and used advanced farming techniques. Seeing mercantilism in action really drives this home. When you ask who benefits, it becomes crystal clear why this doctrine was so wildly popular in its day. It perfectly served the interests of monarchs and government officials who were desperately trying to expand their military power and conquer colonies. The economic theory provided the ultimate justification for their aggressive actions and wealth hoarding. Okay, question number 4, era validity. Basically, was this school actually useful in solving the problems of its specific time?
This one is absolutely crucial. Because let's face it, ideas that are irrelevant just wither and die. But theories that actually solve pressing real-world problems, those spread like wildfire. A perfect example is the Great Depression of the 1930s. The sheer economic devastation totally changed the landscape. People were desperate. The demand for a solution to these massive, crippling business fluctuations grew so incredibly insistent that something simply had to change.
Which brings us to our fifth and final question. Lasting contributions. What actually survives today? Going back to that 1930s crisis, John Maynard Keynes arrived on the scene at exactly the right moment. Keynes stepped up and provided both an explanation for those terrifying economic fluctuations and, crucially, a concrete program to actually mitigate them. The desperation of the Great Depression gave his ideas huge momentum, making his theories phenomenally valid and useful for his era. But the really amazing part? His ideas survive long past that era. This is what Question 5 is all about, finding the concepts of such lasting significance that they're literally still in our textbooks right now. Keynesian concepts like the saving function, fiscal and monetary policy, and the ISLM model, which maps out the relationship between interest rates and real economic output, are absolute standard fare in modern economics today. They made it through the crucible of time.
But as we wrap up this toolkit, our source material drops a pretty heavy warning on us. It notes that concepts widely accepted today may become inappropriate in the future. That's kind of wild to think about, right? Economic thought is never static. It's constantly evolving as our world changes and as we discover new contradictions in our own logic. So, applying this 5-question toolkit to our own modern world, I'll leave you with this to chew on. When historians look back at the economic theories that we accept as absolute, unquestionable truth right now, which ones will they say were just products of our current environment? And which of today's beliefs will actually survive the test of time? Keep asking those questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.